Hi, I'm Amy Cardoso and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Blanton Museum of Art, and our interviewer, Hollis Hammond, speaks with curators Vanessa Davidson and Carter Foster about their exhibition, Pop Critico, Political Pop, Expressive Figuration in the Americas, 1960s to 1980s. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, we're at the Blanton Museum of Art to speak with co-curators Carter Foster and Vanessa Davidson about Pop Critico, Political Pop, Expressive Figuration in the Americas from 1960s to the 80s. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
The exhibition is a selection of contemporary works from the Blanton's permanent collection. Could you speak to the ideas behind the exhibit and also maybe an overview of how you selected the works that you did?
Well, necessity is the mother of invention, and we moved an exhibition to another slot, and so we had to fill this slot. But I always love working with the collection, so we came up with this idea of these two shows, Luis Jimenez and this Pop Critico show, and it was really just from some basic knowledge of the collection, knowing that we could pull a show like this off. I mean, that's the sort of the baseline. If you can't, you don't have the work to support it. And then it was just like digging into the collection. The way I approach it is I do like a sort of works from a certain time period, knowing generally what the pop era is, and then like looking for interesting groupings and working that way. And so it's really that straightforward.
And for me, it was I'm the newest addition to the Blanton team. I arrived in November of 2019, so just before the pandemic. And I've been kind of learning the collection as I go along, so this was a wonderful opportunity for me to dig in deeper and deeper and really see what kind of material we had in this area. And the material I kept coming up with was examples of pop art that were critical in nature. It was pop art with a political edge, pop artists with a political conscience. Carter and I got to talking about that, and it was almost like Go Fish. It was almost like saying that I have these amazing works that deal with these issues, and he would say, okay, well, we could try and pair those with these. And together, working collaboratively, we came up with the show kind of along those lines. But it was really a great pleasure to work with Carter on the show, especially because I think putting our heads together and uniting the Latin American and the American collection shows how the language of critical pop really transcends geography.
Were there any particular works that just sparked your imagination, like when you first started doing that work?
I think we started with the Emilio Cruz and the Jorge de la Vega. Those were two paintings that seemed almost like, they were different versions of the same painting in a funny way. Like they both used this sort of op art, stripe, color field trope, I guess, and they just seemed they went together. They were both made in New York around the same time. They both used appropriation. They both, it was just very interesting to paint. And these aren't artists necessarily strongly associated with pop. I guess Jorge de la Vega is to some degree.
Yes, and it's very interesting because, of course, Emilio Cruz is an artist, an African-American artist born in the Bronx of Cuban parentage, and Jorge de la Vega is Argentine. So he, in the early 60s in Argentina, is a member of the Otra Figuración, the other figuration group, a group which turned to figurative art as a means of expressing existential anxieties. So he's working on kind of in this existential vein in Argentina in the early 60s, and he moves to New York, and his style changes completely because he becomes fascinated by American popular culture and TV and magazines and advertisements. And he said that America is such a powerful and artificial world that, by contrast, man acquires relief, is what he said. And so what's so interesting about these paintings, however, is that they look so similar in many ways, and yet in Emilio Cruz's painting is kind of a surrealist version of pop. It unfolds almost like a stage set. But de la Vega is really mocking American popular culture. with this grotesque, monstrous female body that extends across the canvas. And what one of his good friends and collaborators and compatriots, Luis Felipe Noé, said about him was that Jorge de la Vega came from the most underdeveloped country and looked at the most developed country and x-rayed it cruelly.
I wonder if we could go ahead and talk a little bit about this work.
Sure.
Could you tell us more about it?
So Luis Cruz told me that I wrote to him asking him about this work and what it meant to him before we opened the show. And he painted it in 1983. It's called Homo Fragile. And what he told me is that he likened it to the experience of exile, of the experience of feeling displaced and walking on sticks in a new culture. So what you're looking at essentially is a self-portrait of Luis Cruz de Saceta, completely disembodied, completely flayed and nailed down on one side and walking on sticks on the other side. He related to me that his experience of moving to New York in 1960, fleeing the Cuban Revolution at the age of 18. He was fleeing the violence there, and he arrived in New York and all of a sudden found a violent world there. So he felt displaced no matter where he went. He felt like he had a foot in both cultures, but no safe haven in either one. And so what you find here is this expression of personal pain that he's letting out 25 years later. It's, you know, the pain radiates out from this figure in yellow and white and red brushstrokes, these gestural brushstrokes like a force field, and his mouth is open in this silent howl. And it's a painting that really expresses the anguish of exile, the anguish of just not finding your place and feeling so disembodied no matter where you go in either culture.
I do want to talk about two more pairings that stood out to me, and they both relate to the artist Beatriz Gonzalez. And I wondered if you could talk. So there's a pairing with a kind of early painting by Botero, and then there's a later silkscreen that's paired with a Jacob Lawrence. So could you guys tell us more about these particular pairings?
Absolutely. The pairing with the Botero and the Beatriz Gonzalez is actually one that really stood out to us as kind of a very interesting take on portraiture entre comillas, in quotes, because both artists, Botero in '66 and Beatriz Gonzalez in 1968, are creating images that present their subjects who are very dear to the heart of all of Latin America as popular icons for mass consumption. And both artists actually appropriate images in these two works that are paired together. So Santa Rosa de Lima from Botero is appropriated from a canvas by Gregorio Velázquez Ceballos, who was one of the most important colonial painters of his day. I think that it's important to note that Botero's fame and the ubiquity of his later works made, it kind of overshadowed the radical social and religious critique of his early works, such as Santa Rosa de Lima. He painted this painting when he was living between New York and Bogota, and I believe he probably painted it when he was in New York, kind of looking back at Latin America. It's the first time in his work that he's actually not only copying or appropriating a painting by a Latin American master, but also focusing on the Latin American subject, because Santa Rosa de Lima was the first Latin American to be canonized. She was known for her physical beauty in her lifetime, which she tried to deny through mortification and fasting. And so when Botero inflates the saint to rotund proportions, what he's doing is subtly criticizing the church, because this fasting saint all of a sudden is very pleasantly plump. So he's subtly criticizing the church under the cover of humor. And the church in Colombia was also very much involved in matters of state. So it's a roundabout way of making that critique very subtly, under the guise of humor, but at the same time copying an earlier painting and then presenting Santa Rosa as a popular icon for mass consumption. Now, what Botero and Gonzalez does is to take an image that has been copied so many times that it's very difficult to find the source, because her painting is a gentleman who looks so decidedly contemporary that it's difficult to even think that it might be the 19th century independence hero Simón Bolívar, but it actually is. And it comes from a painting that was most likely painted in the 19th century. But this appropriation is one that she does very, very loosely, because what she presents is a completely pop rendition of this independence hero, Simón Bolívar, with a bright green jacket and blue gloves and a teal belt, looking out at the viewer with a pink face and pink curtains, and against a bright yellow background. And I think what's so important here in this Botero and Gonzalez painting is that she really shows that how fallacious the idea is that Latin American artists only copy original works of art produced elsewhere, and that they are derivative, because that's often a fallacious notion of that they only copy originals produced in Europe or America. But this is really a pop art about a Latin American subject. So it's an original work both in form and in content, and it's Latin American through and through.
And the other pairing I find really interesting as well, the Gonzalez with the Jacob Lawrence.
It was interesting to bring together artists who aren't normally associated together, who are different generations, which is the case here. And in this case, Botero Gonzalez is very associated with the pop movement, you know, in her own country, and just her general, that's one of the movements she's most associated with. By the way, she's still around making work. She just had a retrospective at the MFA in Houston not long ago. But, and Jacob Lawrence, I wouldn't say is associated with the pop movement, but something that he did early on in his career, which was approach figurative forms, that is to say not abstract, but narrative stories, with these blocks of flat, broad areas of color. That's how he sort of composed. And he did that, you know, when he made his famous Migration series when he was a very young man, which sort of, you know, helped make his career. And he was still working in that mode decades later, and also working in screen printing, which is very much a pop idiom, or a pop medium, because it can produce broad, flat areas of colors very readily. And to pair these two artists who, you know, had a similar approach to making compositions, but of different generations, but also, you know, in around the same time period in the 70s. And it was just interesting to look at these similar approaches. And of course, artists are absorbing what's going on in contemporary life. So, you know, they're seeing what's going on in the art world, and whether consciously or not adapting some of those similar strategies. I mean, I think that's the argument that we make, is that Lawrence was fully comfortable working in a pop idiom, in fact may have influenced it from his earlier work, but that it was easily adaptable to contemporary trends. So, and showing with Gonzalez just seemed they look so similar, it's very interesting, and they both deal with I mean, in Lawrence's case, he deals with a subject, the Great Migration and voter rights. And Gonzalez is appropriating a historical image that involves also Simón Bolívar from, I believe I have that right. Yeah, so it's interesting, yeah.
Thank you both so much.
Sure.
I'm super inspired by the exhibit, and I love getting to hear deeper, like your thinking of how you put these works together, and even pulling things from outside the pop genre in some ways and bringing it into this conversation. It's really exciting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We want to thank Vanessa and Carter for speaking with us. For more information on their exhibition, go to blantonmuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching. Find all of our videos and sign up for our newsletter at artthisweek.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.
This is in Vanessa's area. I'll let her
Sure.
speak.